The scent of cardamom and saffron filled my kitchen as I carefully lifted the lid off my biryani. Steam billowed upward, carrying decades of perfected flavors, recipes handed down through 4 generations in my family. I'd spent all morning preparing this special meal for my son Thaddeus's birthday. As I arranged the crispy onion garnish atop the golden rice, I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. They were early. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, we're here, Thaddeus called out, his voice echoing through my modest bungalow. I hurried to greet them, wiping my hands on the apron my late husband had given me years ago. The moment I saw Thaddeus's smile, I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. My son. My pride. But as always, that warmth cooled when my eyes met Priscilla's, my daughter-in-law of 3 years. She stood in my entryway in her pristine white pantsuit, surveying my home with that barely concealed look of disdain I'd grown accustomed to. Something smells interesting, she said, her nose wrinkling slightly. It's Dadi's special biryani, I explained, trying to keep my voice light. Thaddeus's favorite since he was a boy. Priscilla turned to my son. Remember, we have the charity gala tonight. We can't show up smelling like... She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. Whatever. That is. I felt that familiar sting but pushed it aside. Well, there's plenty of time to eat and freshen up before your event. Come. As we sat at my dining table, the same oak table where I'd fed Thaddeus every meal after my husband Rajiv passed, I watched as Priscilla picked at the biryani with her fork, moving it around rather than taking a bite. Just try it, Thaddeus encouraged her. Mom's biryani is legendary. Priscilla took the smallest possible bite, then immediately reached for D, her water glass. It's very ethnic Esmera. She used my name in that way she always did, as if it were something foreign and difficult to pronounce, though it wasn't. But isn't this a bit old-fashioned? At Luminescence, we're reinventing classic dishes with modern techniques. Chef Dominique says traditional cooking like this is, well, embarrassing in today's culinary landscape. Luminescence, the upscale restaurant where Priscilla worked as event coordinator. The place she never failed to mention at every family gathering. I smiled tightly. Some traditions are worth preserving. Of course, she replied with a dismissive wave. It's sweet that you try, but honestly, I wouldn't serve this at a serious dinner. It would be humiliating. Thaddeus choked slightly on his biryani. Pris, come on. But she was already reaching for her phone. Actually, this reminds me, I need to confirm the menu for the Hendersons' anniversary dinner. Luminescence just got a Michelin star reviewer coming next month, did I mention? God, chef is under so much pressure. The owner's been absolutely impossible lately. I sat there, the joy of the meal evaporating as Priscilla tapped away at her phone, occasionally showing Thaddeus photos of proper cuisine, as she called it. My cooking, embarrassing. The recipes my grandmother had taught me, that I had lovingly prepared all these years, humiliating. What Priscilla didn't know, what no one knew, was that tomorrow I had a meeting that would change everything between us. But I kept silent, serving dessert with a smile, swallowing my hurt along with my rosewater pudding. I never intended to become a restaurateur at 62. My dreams had always been simpler: raise my son, honor my heritage, and perhaps one day teach my grandchildren how to fold the perfect samosa. But life rarely follows our careful plans, does it? My story begins in Varathas, a small coastal town that most people couldn't locate on a map. I was born Esmera Kalani, daughter of a spice merchant and a school teacher. Our home constantly smelled of cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom, scents that became the backdrop of my childhood. By age 7, I could identify 20 different spices, blindfolded, simply by their aroma. My grandmother, Dadi, was the one who taught me to cook, standing on a wooden stool beside her as she transformed simple ingredients into magnificent feasts. "Cooking is love made visible," she would say, guiding my small hands as I learned to knead dough for our family's secret bread recipe. "When you cook for someone, you give them more than food. You give them your heart." I believed her then. I still do. When I was 19, I met Rajiv, brilliant, kind, with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. We married within the year and soon moved to America for his engineering job. Leaving Varathas was like leaving a piece of myself behind, but I packed my grandmother's recipes in a worn leather book, promising to keep our traditions alive in our new home. Thaddeus came along 3 years later. Our miracle after doctors had told us children might be impossible. From the moment I held him, my world centered on him. When he first tasted solid food, I made the softest, most delicate kheer, watching with tears in my eyes as his tiny face lit up at the sweet flavors. Food became our connection. As Thaddeus grew, I taught him everything Dadi had taught me. I spent countless weekends in the kitchen, his small fingers learning to crimp pastry edges, his laughter filling our home when flour dusted his nose. Even during his rebellious teenage years, when everything I said seemed to irritate him, cooking together remained our sanctuary. Then Rajiv passed unexpectedly, a heart attack at 52. The ground seemed to fall away beneath me. How does one continue when half of their heart is suddenly gone? But continue I did, because Thaddeus needed me. He was only 17 then, preparing for college, his future still unfolding. I channeled my grief into caring for him, making sure every meal was perfect, every need anticipated. For years after Rajiv's death, financial struggles colored our lives. His insurance covered the mortgage, but little else. I began selling my homemade meals to neighbors, then to local businesses. My samosas and curries became somewhat famous in our little community. It wasn't much, but it helped put Thaddeus through college. I still remember his graduation day, standing there in my best sari, watching my brilliant boy receive his business degree. That night, I made his favorite biryani, the one my grandmother had taught me, the one that would later be called embarrassing in my own home. When Thaddeus introduced me to Priscilla 5 years ago, I tried desperately to bond with her. She was beautiful, ambitious, with the kind of polished confidence I had never possessed. I thought perhaps food might bridge our worlds. I invited her for cooking lessons, offering to teach her the recipes Thaddeus loved. She attended exactly once, spending most of the time on her phone, occasionally glancing up to inform me that my techniques were quaint and outdated. After their wedding, visits became increasingly rare. When they did come, Priscilla would bring store-bought desserts, claiming they were safer than my homemade offerings. Each slight felt like a small cut, painful, but not fatal. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was Thaddeus's happiness. Then came her job at Luminescence, the trendy upscale restaurant that had opened downtown about 2 years ago. Suddenly, every conversation revolved around Chef Dominique this, and at Luminescence we would never that. My traditional cooking became not just outdated, but a source of mockery. I endured it all with a smile, swallowing my hurt like a bitter medicine. What else could I do? Thaddeus seemed happy, successful. His marketing firm was doing well, and he and Priscilla were building the kind of life Rajiv and I had dreamed of for him. Who was I to complain about a few harsh words? But something changed in me that birthday evening. As I washed dishes alone after they'd rushed off to their gala, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. When had I grown so small? When had I started believing that my worth, my traditions, my very self could be dismissed so easily? That night, I pulled out a letter I'd received 3 months earlier. I had told no one about it, Not even Thaddeus. The letter was from my cousin, Nira back in Veritas. Our grandfather, the patriarch of our family, had passed away. To everyone's surprise, he had left me a substantial inheritance. Not just money, but property investments he'd quietly made over decades. He always said you were the one who carried our family's soul in your hands, Nira had written. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He believed you would know how to honor that legacy. For weeks, the letter had sat in my drawer as I wondered what to do. I had never had wealth before. The sum was substantial, nearly $4 million once everything was liquidated and transferred. At first, I thought perhaps I would renovate my modest home, or maybe even travel back to Veritas. But after that evening with Priscilla, a different idea began to form. The next morning, I made a call to Jasper Wade, a financial advisor recommended by the international bank handling my inheritance. When I told him what I wanted to do, he was silent for a long moment. Mrs. Kalani, with all due respect, restaurant investments are extremely risky, even for experienced investors, he cautioned. About 60% fail within the first year. And you're talking about purchasing an established high-end restaurant? The capital required would be significant. I understand the risks, Mr. Wade, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. But I also understand food in a way few investors do. And I'm not looking for a return on investment. At least, not the kind you're thinking of. He agreed to set up some exploratory meetings, though his skepticism was clear. Little did he know that fate was already moving in unexpected ways. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative. Mrs. Kalani, this is Vincent Mercer. I believe we have a mutual connection in Jasper Wade. My heart skipped. Vincent Mercer was a name I recognized from Priscilla's many mentions, the reclusive owner of Luminescence. Mr. Wade mentioned you might be interested in restaurant investments, he continued. I find myself in an unusual position. I'm looking to divest from one of my properties rather quickly and discreetly. Would you be available to discuss this further? Perhaps over lunch at Luminescence tomorrow? I agreed, my mind racing. What were the chances? Was this the universe offering me an opportunity, or setting me up for humiliation? The next day, I dressed in my finest clothes, a deep burgundy silk salwar kameez that Rajiv had always loved, and made my way to Luminescence for the first time. The restaurant was everything Priscilla had described, sleek, modern, with an atmosphere of practiced exclusivity. As I approached the host stand, I saw her. Priscilla was speaking with a server, her back to me, gesturing emphatically about something. Before she could turn around, a tall, silver-haired man approached me. Mrs. Kalani, I presume? Vincent Mercer. Please, follow me to my private dining room. I followed him, relieved to avoid an awkward encounter with my daughter-in-law. The private dining room was intimate, with just one table set for two. Vincent held out my chair with old-world courtesy. I appreciate you meeting me on such short notice, he said once we were seated. I find myself in a rather unusual situation. Over the next hour, Vincent explained his predicament. He had overextended himself with a new restaurant venture in Europe. Luminescence, despite its prestige and growing reputation, required capital investment to reach its full potential. The Michelin reviewer visit next month could change everything, but the kitchen needed upgrades, and the staff needed bonuses to ensure their best performance. In short, Mrs. Kalani, I need a partner or buyer, and I need them quickly and discreetly. The restaurant industry is ruthless. Any hint of financial instability could damage our reputation irreparably. I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. Mr. Mercer, may I ask why me? Surely there are more experienced investors in your circle? He smiled slightly. Jasper Wade speaks very highly of your financial position, and frankly, I'm tired of dealing with venture capitalists who know nothing about food. He mentioned, you have considerable culinary experience. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of pride. Yes, I've been cooking all my life. Traditional recipes mostly. Traditional methods are the foundation of all great cuisine, Vincent said, with unexpected enthusiasm. That's what's missing in so many restaurants today: soul, history, connection. Over dessert, a deconstructed cheesecake that tried too hard to impress, Vincent made his offer. He would sell me a controlling interest in Luminescence, 70% ownership, for a price that, while substantial, was well within my means thanks to my inheritance. Think about it, he said as we parted. No rush. Well, some rush. I'd need an answer within the week. I nodded, my mind already made up, though I didn't tell him that. I'll be in touch. As I left the restaurant, I caught a glimpse of Priscilla in animated conversation with a man I assumed was Chef Dominique. She didn't see me, just as well. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar scents of spices and memories. I opened Dadi's recipe book, tracing the handwritten notes in the margins. Was I really considering this? Buying the very restaurant where my daughter-in-law worked? Where my cooking had been labeled embarrassing? Yes, I was. I called Vincent the next morning. I'd like to proceed, I said simply, but I have one condition. My involvement must remain anonymous until I decide otherwise. He agreed, readily, seeming relieved to have found a solution so quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, lawyers drew up contracts, money was transferred, and inspections were conducted. Throughout it all, I maintained my normal routine, tending my garden, cooking, my embarrassing traditional meals, and saying nothing to Thaddeus or Priscilla about my sudden change in fortune. The day the ownership transfer became official, Vincent called me. Congratulations, Mrs. Kalani. Luminescence is now 70% yours. What would you like to do first? I smiled to myself. I think it's time I visit my restaurant, don't you? The next day was a Thursday. I knew from Priscilla's many mentions that Thursdays were when the restaurant's weekly staff meetings occurred. Perfect. I arrived at Luminescence dressed not in traditional clothes this time, but in a well-tailored black pantsuit, professional, elegant, but still distinctly me. My silver hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and I wore the pearl earrings Rajiv had given me on our 25th anniversary. The host recognized me from my lunch with Vincent. Mrs. Kalani, welcome back. Mr. Mercer mentioned you might be stopping by. The staff is gathered in the private dining room for their meeting. Would you like me to show you in? I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. This was it. As we approached the private dining room, I could hear Priscilla's voice carrying through the partially open door. Absolutely crucial that everything is perfect for the Michelin reviewer. This could put us on the international map. Chef Dominique's new spring menu is revolutionary, and we need to make sure service matches that level of innovation. The host knocked lightly, then pushed the door open. Excuse the interruption. Mrs. Kalani is here to see you all. I stepped into a room of confused faces. About 20 staff members sat around a long table, with Chef Dominique at one end and Priscilla standing at his right, mid-presentation. Her face when she saw me was a picture of shock. Esmera? What are you doing here? She asked, using my first name in that slightly condescending way of hers. Vincent stood from his seat at the far end of the table. Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Esmera Kalani. As of yesterday, she is the majority owner of Luminescence. The room went absolutely silent. Priscilla's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. I smiled. Thank you, Vincent. Please, everyone, don't let me interrupt your meeting. I'm just here to observe today. Carry on. Priscilla finally found her voice. I don't understand. There must be some mistake. Vincent shook his head. No mistake, Ms. Albright. Mrs. Kalani now owns 70% of Luminescence. I've retained 30% and will stay on in an advisory capacity during the transition. Chef Dominique stood abruptly, his face flushing. This is absurd. I wasn't consulted about this. Who is this woman? I met his gaze steadily. I'm a cook, Chef Dominique. Just like you. Though perhaps with a few more years of experience. Priscilla was staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. But you can't even afford. How did you... This isn't possible. Perhaps we could discuss this privately after the... meeting? I suggested calmly. For now, please continue. I'm very interested in hearing about your plans for the Michelin reviewers' visit. The meeting continued in fits and starts, with frequent uncomfortable glances in my direction. I said nothing, just listened and observed. The tension in the room was palpable, especially from Priscilla, who seemed unable to continue her presentation effectively. Finally, Vincent ended the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Please give Mrs. Kalani a warm welcome to the Luminescence family. She brings with her a wealth of culinary knowledge that I believe will only enhance our restaurant's reputation. As the staff filed out, Priscilla remained frozen in place. Chef Dominique lingered as well, his arms crossed defensively across his chest. Now, I said once the room had cleared except for the four of us, I think we should talk. Priscilla found her voice at last. How is this possible? You're a homemaker. You've never run a business in your life. I've been cooking and selling my food since before you were born, Priscilla, I replied evenly. And as for the financial aspect, let's just say my family had resources I never felt the need to broadcast. You can't be serious about this, Chef Dominique interjected. Running a restaurant of this caliber requires expertise, connections, a sophisticated palate. Chef? Vincent interrupted. I suggest you remember who you're speaking to. Mrs. Kalani is now your employer. The chef's face reddened further, but he fell silent. I turned to Priscilla. I understand this is a shock. For now, nothing will change in your position here. I'm still learning about the business and I value continuity. Does Thaddeus know about this? She asked, her voice faint. Not yet, I admitted. I thought I'd tell him tonight. Perhaps you'd like to join us for dinner. I'm making biryani. The embarrassing kind. Her face crumpled slightly at my words, the first time I'd ever acknowledged her insults directly. Vincent cleared his throat. I'll leave you to sort out family matters. Mrs. Kalani, we have a review of the financial statements scheduled for tomorrow morning. After he left, Chef Dominique stalked out without another word, leaving Priscilla and me alone in the room. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? To humiliate me? I considered her question carefully before answering. No, Priscilla, not to humiliate you, to remind you and myself of something important. What's that? She asked warily. That we should never be ashamed of who we are or where we come from. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. Dinner is at 7. I hope you'll both come. As I walked through the restaurant toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about teaching Priscilla a lesson, though perhaps that would happen naturally. This was about reclaiming my voice, my heritage, my worth. At 62, I had become a restaurateur, but more importantly, I had remembered who I was. Esmira Kalani, daughter of a spice merchant, keeper of traditions, a woman who knew that cooking was love made visible, and no one would ever call that embarrassing again. That evening, I prepared the biryani with extra care, layering the fragrant rice and spiced lamb just as Dadi had taught me. As I worked, I found myself humming softly, something I hadn't done in the kitchen for years. The familiar melody, a lullaby from my childhood, filled the spaces between the sounds of chopping and sizzling. 7 o'clock came and went with no sign of Thaddeus or Priscilla. At 7:30, I received a text message from my son. Something came up at work. Rain check? No mention of our conversation at Luminescence, no acknowledgement of my new position. I knew then that Priscilla hadn't told him. Sitting alone at my dining table, I savored my biryani, each grain of rice perfectly cooked, each piece of lamb tender and flavorful. For the first time in years, I truly tasted my own cooking without the lens of someone else's judgment. It was good. It was more than good. It was excellent. The realization brought both sadness and determination. How long had I allowed others to diminish what I knew to be true? The next morning, I arrived at Luminescence before opening hours for my scheduled meeting with Vincent. The restaurant looked different in the early morning light, more vulnerable, somehow stripped of its evening glamour. A cleaning crew was finishing up, and the kitchen staff was beginning prep for the day. A few gave me curious glances as I passed. Vincent was waiting in the office, a stack of financial documents spread across the desk before him. "Good morning, Mrs. Kalani. I trust you slept well? Big decisions can sometimes lead to restless nights." "I slept perfectly well, thank you," I replied, taking the seat he offered. In truth, I had lain awake for hours, alternating between doubt and excitement, but he didn't need to know that. For the next 2 hours, Vincent walked me through the restaurant's financial situation. Luminescence was profitable, but only marginally so. The high overhead costs of maintaining its exclusive image ate into the returns. The staff was well paid compared to industry standards, with Chef Dominique commanding a particularly impressive salary. "The Michelin reviewer's visit is crucial," Vincent explained. "A star would allow us to raise prices further without losing clientele. It would also open the door to cookbook deals, television appearances for the chef, merchandise opportunities." I nodded, taking careful notes. "And what changes would you recommend making before this important visit?" Vincent hesitated. "If I were still sole owner, I'd probably update some of the kitchen equipment, perhaps refresh the dining room decor. Nothing drastic. Michelin reviewers value consistency and excellence, not novelty for novelty's sake." "And the menu?" "Chef Dominique has been working on a special tasting menu for months. It's innovative, certainly. Whether it's delicious is another question." He gave a small smile. "Between us, I think he sometimes prioritizes presentation over flavor." I made another note. "I'd like to taste this menu, all of it." "Of course. I'll arrange for a tasting this afternoon." As our meeting concluded, I asked the question that had been lingering in my mind. "Vincent, may I ask why you really sold to me? You could have found a more experienced restaurant investor." He was silent for a moment, looking down at his hands. "My wife died last year," he said finally. "Cancer. During her last months, all she wanted was food that reminded her of her childhood. Not the fancy meals we'd become accustomed to, simple things, comfort foods. I hired chef after chef, but none could recreate what she remembered." He looked up at me. "When Jasper mentioned you, your background, your dedication to traditional cooking, something clicked. Luminescence needs soul, Mrs. Kalani. It has style and skill in abundance, but it lacks heart." His honesty touched me. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you. She would have liked you, I think." He gathered his papers. "Now, shall we tour the kitchen?" The kitchen was a marvel of modern design, all gleaming stainless steel and state-of-the-art equipment. The staff moved with practiced precision, each person focused intently on their tasks. At the center of it all stood Chef Dominique, tall and imposing in his pristine whites, barking orders in a mixture of English and French. He stiffened visibly when he saw us enter. "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Kalani." "Good morning, Chef," Vincent replied, smoothly. "Mrs. Kalani would like a tour of the kitchen, followed by a tasting of the Michelin menu this afternoon." The chef's jaw tightened. The menu is not yet perfected. Then consider this a valuable test run, I said, smiling pleasantly. I'm eager to experience your vision. For the next hour, Vincent guided me through each station of the kitchen, introducing me to the staff. Most were polite, but reserved, clearly uncertain about how to interact with their new owner. I made note of each name, each role, watching how they worked together. And this is our pastry section, Vincent explained as we approached a corner of the kitchen where a young woman was piping delicate designs onto chocolate discs. Zoya is our pastry chef, he continued, one of our most valuable team members. The young woman looked up, her dark eyes widening slightly in recognition. Mrs. Kalani? I thought it was you. I looked at her more closely. Zoya Mirza? Is that really you? She nodded, a smile breaking across her face. Yes, I can't believe you remember me. To Vincent's confused expression, I explained. Zoya's mother was one of my first customers when I started selling homemade meals. Zoya used to help deliver them sometimes. Mrs. Kalani's samosas put me through culinary school, Zoya said warmly. My mother would buy them wholesale and resell them at her store. They were always the first things to sell out. I felt a rush of pleasure at this unexpected connection. And now you're a pastry chef at Luminescence. Your parents must be so proud. She nodded, then glanced quickly at Chef Dominique, who was watching our interaction with narrowed eyes. I should get back to work, but it's wonderful to see you, Mrs. Kalani. Truly. As we moved away, Vincent murmured, That's the first genuine smile I've seen in this kitchen in months. The kitchen tour concluded. Vincent escorted me to the dining room where the staff was preparing for lunch service. Priscilla was there, directing the arrangement of fresh flowers on each table. She froze when she saw me, then quickly resumed her work, studiously avoiding eye contact. Priscilla? I called gently. Good morning. She turned, her expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Mrs. Kalani. The formality stung, though I understood it. In her mind, I had orchestrated this entire situation to humiliate her. Perhaps, in some small corner of my heart, that had been part of my motivation, but there was so much more to it than that. I missed you and Thaddeus at dinner last night, I said. She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Yes, well, it was a surprising day. Indeed. I'm scheduled for a tasting of Chef Dominique's Michelin menu this afternoon. Perhaps you'd care to join us? I'd value your opinion. Surprise flickered across her face. My opinion? Why? Because you know this restaurant and its clientele, and because, despite our differences, you're family. She seemed at a loss for words. Finally, she nodded. I'll be there. The tasting was set for 2:00, after the lunch rush and before dinner preparations began in earnest. I spent the interim observing the restaurant in operation, noting the flow of service, the interaction between staff, the reactions of guests. Everything ran smoothly on the surface, but I detected an undercurrent of tension, particularly whenever Chef Dominique emerged from the kitchen to speak with a guest. At precisely 2:00, I was escorted to a private dining room where an elegant table had been set for 3. Vincent was already there, as was Priscilla sitting stiffly in her chair. Chef Dominique entered moments later, followed by 2 servers carrying the first course. We begin with an amuse-bouche, the chef announced with practiced flair. A deconstruction of traditional bouillabaisse, saffron foam, rouille sphere, compressed fish mosaic. The dish was visually stunning, a small glass filled with pale yellow foam, topped with a perfect sphere of rust-colored sauce, alongside a thin rectangle of fish prepared to resemble stained glass. I took a careful taste, considering the flavors. The technique was impressive, certainly, but the dish was strangely cold, emotionally speaking. All style, little substance. Course after course followed, each more elaborate than the last. Smoked duck breast with cherry gel and edible flowers. Lobster 3 ways with confit lemon and black garlic. A palate cleanser of eucalyptus sorbet with liquid nitrogen frozen herbs. Each was beautiful. Each showed technical mastery, and each left me oddly unsatisfied. Throughout the meal, Chef Dominique described each dish with increasing intensity, his eyes constantly seeking our reaction. Vincent made appropriate appreciative noises. Priscilla nodded enthusiastically at each explanation. I remained thoughtfully silent, taking small, deliberate bites. By the 6th course, a Wagyu beef preparation involving 5 different cooking methods and 7 garnishes, the chef's patience was wearing thin. "You've said almost nothing, Mrs. Kalani," he remarked tersely. "Is the cuisine not to your liking?" I placed my fork down carefully. "Your skill is evident, Chef Dominique. Each dish is technically flawless." "But?" he prompted, his accent thickening with irritation. "But I find myself wondering what these dishes are trying to say." He blinked, confused. "Say? They're not meant to speak. They're meant to be eaten." "Food always speaks," I replied gently. "It tells us about the cook, about the culture, about what matters. Your food shows incredible technique, but I can't feel what matters to you about it." Chef Dominique's face flushed. "This is absurd. You know nothing about modern gastronomy. This menu represents years of training, of study." "I'm not questioning your training," I interrupted. "I'm asking about your heart. When you create these dishes, what are you hoping the diner will feel?" "Feel?" he scoffed. "They should feel impressed, awed by innovation. That's what Michelin rewards, pushing boundaries, technical excellence." "Actually," Vincent interjected quietly, "Michelin rewards delicious food above all. The stars are given for cooking worth a special journey. The question is whether diners will make that journey for technique alone." The chef turned to Priscilla, clearly expecting her support. Tell them how our guests rave about the menu, how we're booked months in advance." Priscilla looked uncomfortably between us. "The restaurant is successful, yes. But—" She hesitated. "But what?" I encouraged. "But we've seen a decline in repeat business over the past 6 months," she admitted reluctantly. "People come once for the experience, but fewer return." Chef Dominique looked betrayed. "You never mentioned this." "You never asked," she replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "You're in the kitchen. I'm the one who speaks with the guests, who handles the reservations. They praise the artistry, take photos for social media, but they don't come back like they used to." A heavy silence fell over the table. Finally, I spoke. "Chef, would you be open to a suggestion?" His jaw was tight, but he nodded curtly. "For the Michelin tasting, why not create a menu that tells your story? Not just your technical abilities, but your journey as a chef, the flavors that shaped you, the memories that inspired you." "My story?" he repeated, as if the concept was foreign. "Yes. Every great chef I've ever known cooks from a place of memory, of passion. What are the foods that made you want to become a chef in the first place?" Something shifted in his expression, a momentary softening, quickly masked. "That's not how modern fine dining works." "Perhaps it should be," Vincent suggested. "Trends in gastronomy are cyclical. Perhaps authenticity is due for a renaissance." The conversation continued, tense but productive. By the end of the tasting, no. Firm decisions had been made about the menu, but a seed had been planted. As we prepared to leave, Chef Dominique approached me privately. "Mrs. Kalani, I would like to propose a challenge." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Tomorrow evening, we each prepare one dish. No rules except that it must represent our best cooking. The staff will taste blind and vote on which they prefer." I considered his offer. The competitive part of me wanted to accept immediately. But I was the owner now. I needed to consider the broader implications. And what would be the purpose of this challenge, chef? He straightened, his pride evident in every line of his body. To establish respect. If I win, I maintain complete creative control of the menu. If you win, I will consider your suggestions more carefully. It was a risk. The staff would likely favor their chef out of loyalty, if nothing else. And I had no access to professional equipment, no team of sous chefs. But something in his challenge called to my spirit. I accept, I said. Tomorrow at 5, before dinner service. Priscilla, who had been pretending not to listen, looked up in alarm. Esmira, are you sure that's wise? Chef Dominique has trained at the best culinary schools in Europe. He's worked in 3-star restaurants. And I've cooked for 62 years, I replied simply. Experience counts for something too. That evening, I returned home to find Thaddeus waiting on my doorstep. His expression was troubled, confused. Mom, can we talk? I let him in, noting how he glanced around the familiar kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. Perhaps he was wondering what other secrets it contained. So it's true, he said finally. You bought luminescence. How? Why? I gestured. For him to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals, where I'd taught him to roll dough and crush spices. It's a long story. Over a pot of cardamom tea, I told him about my inheritance, about my meeting with Vincent, about my decision to invest. I didn't mention Priscilla's insults or my hurt. He was perceptive enough to fill in those gaps himself. I had no idea, he said when I finished. About the inheritance, about how you felt, any of it. I know. Priscilla is complicated. She grew up with parents who valued status above all else. It's made her sensitive about appearances. That doesn't excuse cruelty, I replied, gently. He looked down, ashamed. No, it doesn't. And I should have said something. I got used to playing peacekeeper. It seemed easier. For whom? He had no answer for that. Thaddeus, I continued. I didn't buy luminescence to punish Priscilla, or to create conflict between you two. I bought it because for the first time in decades, I had the means to do something for myself, to build something that honors my heritage, my passion. But a restaurant? At your age? It's such a demanding business. I smiled wryly. My age is precisely why I couldn't wait. How many years do you think I have left to pursue dreams? He flinched at the question. Don't talk like that. It's not morbid. It's realistic. I've spent my life caring for others. You, your father, our community. I don't regret a moment of it. But now I have a chance to create something that's wholly mine. Can you understand that? Slowly, he nodded. I think so. I worry. About you. I'm stronger than you think. He smiled slightly. I'm beginning to see that. Before he left, I told him about the cooking challenge. To my surprise, he laughed. Oh, I'd pay good money to see that. Chef Dominique has no idea what he's up against. You'll come? I wouldn't miss it for the world. After he left, I spent hours planning my dish for the challenge. It needed to be perfect, not just technically, but emotionally. A dish that would speak of who I was, where I came from, what cooking meant to me. I fell asleep with recipes dancing in my head, and woke before dawn, energized in a way I hadn't felt in years. I spent the morning gathering ingredients, visiting, specialty markets for the specific spices I needed. By early afternoon, I began cooking in my own kitchen, preparing elements that would travel well to luminescence. The familiar motions calmed me, the rhythmic chopping, the careful measuring, the patient tending of simmering pots. This was my domain, my expertise. Here, I was confident. At 4:30, I packed everything carefully and drove to the restaurant. Chef Dominique had agreed to let me use a small section of the kitchen for final assembly. When I arrived, The energy in the kitchen was electric. Word of the challenge had spread, and the entire staff seemed to be finding excuses to linger near the main prep area. Chef Dominique was already at work, surrounded by a team of sous chefs who moved in perfect coordination with him. His station was a flurry of precise activity, protein being seared, sauces being emulsified, garnishes being tweezed into place. My station, by contrast, was just me, a 62-year-old woman in a simple apron, unpacking containers of home-prepared components. More than one staff member gave me pitying glances. Even Zoya, despite her earlier warmth, seemed to doubt my chances. Priscilla arrived at 4:45, slipping into the kitchen quietly. She seemed surprised to see Thaddeus already there, chatting with Vincent near the pass. He'd dressed up, I noticed, wearing the tie I'd given him last Christmas. The gesture touched me. At exactly 5, Vincent called the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what I'm certain will be a memorable event. Today we have a friendly culinary challenge between our executive chef, Dominique Beaufort, and our new owner, Esmera Kalani." He outlined the rules: 1 dish each, blind tasting by the staff, simple majority vote. Chefs, you have 30 minutes to complete your dishes. Begin now. Chef Dominique's team leapt into action with military precision. I worked alone, methodically. My dish required no last-minute molecular techniques, no liquid nitrogen, no fancy equipment. Just careful assembly of elements prepared with love and attention. 25 minutes later, Chef Dominique called, "Done." His team stepped back, revealing 12 identical plates. Each featured a composition that resembled abstract art: a swirl of vibrant green puree, 3 perfect cubes of seared meat, spheres of various sauces, edible flowers, and what appeared to be a crisp tuile balanced precariously on top. It was objectively beautiful. I worked for 5 more minutes, unhurried. When I finally straightened, my 12 plates told a different story. Each held what appeared to be a simple curry, rich, aromatic, with chunks of lamb visible beneath. The sauce. A piece of homemade bread accompanied each plate, along with a small scoop of cucumber raita. No tweezered garnishes, no architectural constructions, just food meant to be eaten. The contrast between our dishes couldn't have been more stark. His shouted of technical brilliance and artistic vision. Mine whispered of home, of comfort, of tradition. The staff lined up, 24 of them in total. Each would taste both dishes without knowing who had prepared which. Vincent had arranged for small screens to shield the plates from view until they were directly in front of each taster. "Dish A and Dish B," Vincent announced, not revealing which was which. "Please taste both fully before making your decision. Then place your vote in one of these boxes." He indicated 2 simple boxes, labeled only A and B. The tasting began. I watched carefully as each staff member approached the dishes. Their reactions to Chef Dominique's creation were consistent: appreciative nods at the presentation, thoughtful consideration of the complex flavors, professional respect. Their reactions to my dish were more varied, but distinctly emotional. Several closed their eyes while tasting. One young waiter actually teared up. Zoya, after tasting, gave me the smallest of winks. As the voting continued, Priscilla approached me. "What exactly did you make?" she asked quietly. "Lamb Rogan Josh," I replied. "My grandmother's recipe, the same dish I prepared the first time Thaddeus brought you to dinner. You barely touched it then." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I remember. I was nervous that night. Meeting you was intimidating." I looked at her in surprise. "Me? Intimidating? Thaddeus worshipped you, still does. You were this perfect mother figure I could never live up to. It was easier to look down on your food than to admit I was terrified you wouldn't think I was good enough for your son." Her honesty caught me off guard. Before I could respond, Vincent called for our attention. "The voting is complete. I will now count." The room fell silent as Vincent opened each box, carefully tallying the votes. Chef Dominique stood rigid, his face a mask of confidence. I found myself holding my breath. "The final count," Vincent announced, "is 9 votes for dish A and 15 votes for dish B." A murmur ran through the room. Chef Dominique's expression tightened. "Dish B," Vincent continued, "was prepared by Mrs. Kalani. Dish A by Chef Dominique. Mrs. Kalani wins the challenge." For a moment, no one moved. Then Zoya began to applaud, and others quickly joined in. The applause wasn't raucous or celebratory. It was respectful, acknowledging. Chef Dominique remained frozen, disbelief evident in every line of his body. I moved toward him, extending my hand. "Your dish was beautiful, chef. True artistry." He stared at my hand for a long moment before taking it. "How?" he asked simply. "Your food speaks of ambition," I replied. "Mine speaks of love. Both have their place." Thaddeus appeared at my side, beaming with pride. "I told you," he said, squeezing my shoulder. They had no idea what they were up against. Later, as the kitchen reset for dinner service, Vincent, Thaddeus, Priscilla, and I gathered in the office to discuss next steps. Chef Dominique had retreated to his station, processing his defeat in solitude. "This changes the dynamic considerably," Vincent observed. "The staff will view you differently now, Mrs. Kalani. They've seen what you can do." "What exactly are your plans now?" Priscilla asked, her tone neutral but curious. "Will you be taking over the kitchen?" "No," I replied firmly. "Chef Dominique is talented. He just needs to reconnect with why he began cooking in the first place." "And how do you propose to help him do that?" Vincent asked. I smiled. "By introducing a new segment to our menu. Alongside Chef Dominique's modern creations, we'll offer a selection of heritage dishes, traditional recipes with personal significance to our staff." "A dual menu?" Thaddeus looked intrigued. "Modern and traditional side by side?" "Exactly. Each week will feature a different staff member's heritage, their family recipes, their cultural dishes. We'll tell their stories alongside the food. Chef Dominique will supervise for quality, but the recipes will remain authentic." Priscilla frowned slightly. "That's, unconventional for a restaurant of this caliber." "Precisely why it might interest a Michelin reviewer," Vincent countered. "It's unique, genuine. It tells a story beyond the plate." "And the first heritage menu?" Thaddeus asked. I met Priscilla's eyes. "I thought perhaps we might feature your family's traditions." "Priscilla, you've mentioned your grandmother was from Louisiana? Creole cuisine has such a rich history." She looked startled. "My grandmother's recipes? But you? Why would you?" "Because despite our differences, we're family. And family heritage matters." For the first time since I'd known her, Priscilla seemed genuinely moved. I'd like that. She taught me to make her gumbo when I was little, before cooking became about impressing people. "Then gumbo it will be," I said softly. "The first dish on our heritage menu." As we left the office, Thaddeus pulled me aside. "Mom, what you're doing here, it's incredible. But I have to ask, are you sure this is what you want? Restaurants are such risky investments." I looked around at the bustling kitchen, at the staff now viewing me with new eyes, at Priscilla deep in conversation with Vincent about her grandmother's cooking. "I've spent my life playing it safe, Thaddeus, taking care of others, putting my dreams aside. For once, I'm taking a risk on myself. And if it fails," I smiled, "then it fails, but I'll have tried, and that's worth everything." Vincent approached, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Mrs. Kalani, Chef Dominique has asked to speak with you. He's in the wine cellar." I found the chef sitting alone among the bottles, a glass of red wine in his hand. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Kalani?" he acknowledged, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Please." I sat, waiting. "I've been cooking professionally for 27 years, he began. "I've worked in the finest restaurants in France, trained under legendary chefs. I've pushed boundaries, mastered techniques few can execute." He took a sip of his wine, and today I was defeated by a curry. "Not just a curry," I corrected gently. "A story, a connection, something that spoke to emotions, not just intellect." He was silent for a long moment. "When I was a boy," he said finally, "my mother made coq au vin every Sunday. It was simple, rustic, nothing like what I cook now, but the smell of it. Even now, it takes me home." He looked up, his expression vulnerable for the first time. "I haven't made it in 15 years, too. Basic for a chef of my caliber. Perhaps it's time to remember what made you fall in love with cooking in the first place." He nodded slowly. "This heritage menu concept of yours, it has potential, if executed properly. With your expertise and my perspective, I believe we can create something truly special." He raised his glass slightly. "To new beginnings, then." I smiled. "To remembering what matters." As I left the wine cellar, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This restaurant, this unexpected new chapter in my life, wasn't about proving myself or humiliating my daughter-in-law. It was about honoring traditions, creating connections, and remembering that cooking, at its heart, is an act of love. In the kitchen, Priscilla was showing Zoya a handwritten recipe card, her face animated in a way I'd never seen before. Thaddeus watched them, a mixture of surprise and pleasure in his expression. When he saw me, he moved to my side. "You know," he said quietly, "I think this might be the first time I've ever seen her talk about her family without being defensive." "Food has a way of opening doors," I replied. "You've changed things here already, in just 2 days." I squeezed his hand. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stand up and say, "This matters. This tradition, this heritage, this love, it all matters." As we walked through the dining room, now filling with the evening's first guests, I felt a strange sense of coming home. Not to a place, but to myself, to the woman I'd always been beneath the roles of wife, mother, caretaker. Esmera Kalani, keeper of traditions, teller of stories through food. My daughter-in-law had called my cooking embarrassing, and in response, I'd bought the restaurant where she worked. But in doing so, I'd discovered something far more valuable than revenge. I'd reclaimed my voice, my heritage, my worth. And that was a dish best served not cold, but with warmth, with generosity, with love. The news of our heritage menu concept spread through the culinary community like wildfire. What began as an internal challenge had evolved into something far more significant, a complete reimagining of what fine dining could be. In the 3 weeks following my acquisition of Luminescence, we transformed not just our menu, but our entire philosophy. Chef Dominique, to my surprise, embraced the change with unexpected enthusiasm. The morning after our challenge, he arrived at the restaurant carrying a worn, leather-bound notebook. "My grandmother's recipes," he explained, a hint of sheepishness in his usually confident demeanor. "I haven't looked at them in years. Perhaps there is something here we could adapt." Together, we created a new vision for Luminescence, one that balanced his technical brilliance with authentic tradition. Each week featured a different cultural heritage, beginning with Priscilla's Creole grandmother. Her gumbo, served with proper filet powder and homemade andouille sausage, became an instant favorite among regular guests. The story we printed on the menu about her grandmother learning to cook on a wood-burning stove in rural Louisiana captivated diners and staff alike. The second week featured Zoya's Pakistani heritage, with her family's keema curry and freshly baked naan. The third celebrated line cook Miguel's Oaxacan roots with complex moles and hand-pressed tortillas. Each staff member whose recipes we featured worked directly with Chef Dominique, teaching techniques passed down through generations. What surprised me most was the change in Priscilla. The wall of pretension she had built began to crumble as she shared stories of her childhood summers in Louisiana. One evening, as we finalized plans for the following week's menu, she approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Esmira, I've been thinking about your biryani," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The one you made for Thaddeus's birthday. I wonder if you might teach me how to make it properly." The request caught me off guard. "You want to learn my biryani recipe?" She nodded, a flush spreading across her cheeks. I've realized I may have been hasty in my judgment. The heritage menus have shown me that there's something special about dishes with history, with meaning. I studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity, but finding none. "I'd be happy to teach you. Perhaps this Sunday? You and Thaddeus could come for lunch and we could cook together afterward." The cooking lesson that Sunday marked a turning point in our relationship. Priscilla arrived dressed not in her usual immaculate attire, but in simple jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. In my kitchen, she proved to be an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions, taking careful notes on spice, proportions, watching intently as I demonstrated how to layer the rice and meat. "My grandmother never wrote anything down," she confessed as we worked. "She always said real cooking happens in the hands, not on paper." By the time I was old enough to appreciate what she knew, she was already gone. I've been trying to recreate her gumbo for years from memory. "Perhaps that's why you responded so strongly to the heritage menu concept," I suggested. "It's preserving something precious that might otherwise be lost." She nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I've spent so long trying to fit into a world that values novelty above all else. At Luminescence, before you came, it was all about the next trend, the next technique. Nothing lasted." "And now?" A small smile touched her lips. "Now we're making food with roots, food that means something." As the Michelin reviewers' visit approached, the energy in the restaurant intensified. Every surface gleamed. Every dish was scrutinized, every service rehearsed to perfection. Chef Dominique, despite his initial resistance, had fully embraced our dual approach. His modern creations now carried echoes of traditional techniques, while our heritage offerings had been refined with his expert touch, not changing their essential nature, but elevating their presentation. "We will offer them a choice," he announced during our final planning meeting. "A modern tasting menu or a heritage journey. Both excellent, both worthy of recognition, but speaking in different culinary languages." Vincent, who had remained as a minority partner and advisor, nodded approvingly. "It's brilliant, actually. No other restaurant at this level is doing anything similar. It's not fusion, it's parallel traditions respecting each other." The night before the scheduled review, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my kitchen at 3 a.m. chai, absent-mindedly rolling dough for flatbread I didn't need, my mind racing with contingencies, possibilities, worries. What if our concept was too unconventional? What if the reviewer was a traditionalist who viewed our approach as gimmicky? What if... My phone rang, startling me. Who would call at this hour? The display showed Luminescence's number. "Hello?" I answered, a flutter of panic in my chest. "Mrs. Kalani?" It was Chef Dominique, his voice tight with stress. "We have a situation. Could you come to the restaurant?" I arrived 20 minutes later to find the kitchen in a state of controlled chaos. Chef Dominique paced near the walk-in refrigerator, his face ashen. Zoya stood nearby, wringing her hands. "What's happened?" I asked. "Our seafood delivery," the chef explained, his accent thickening with distress. "It's spoiled, all of it. and the reviewer is coming tomorrow. I peered into the walk-in. The smell was unmistakable. The delicate scallops, prawns, and fish fillets that had been delivered that evening had turned, not just slightly off, but completely unusable. Could we get another delivery? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Chef Dominique shook his head. Not of this quality, not on such short notice. Our supplier harvests to order. The next fresh catch won't be until tomorrow afternoon, after the reviewer has already come and gone. I took a deep breath, considering our options. The seafood course was central to both our modern and heritage menus. Without it, we would need to completely rethink our approach. What do we have available? I asked, moving deeper into the walk-in. To survey our remaining inventory. Plenty of meat. The lamb, beef, and poultry deliveries are fine. Vegetables, grains, spices all accounted for. It's only the seafood that's compromised, Zoya reported. Chef Dominique ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him before. We could improvise with what we have, but it won't be what we've practiced. The timing, the progression of flavors, everything will be off. I closed my eyes, thinking. Then it came to me, a memory from my childhood in Varathas, when an unexpected storm prevented the fishermen from going out to sea. The village had adapted, creating a feast from what was available. What if, I said slowly, instead of seeing this as a disaster, we embrace it as an opportunity? A chance to demonstrate our philosophy in action? They looked at me questioningly. Real cooking, traditional cooking, has always been about adaptation, about making the most of what's available. What if we create a special menu for tomorrow? That tells that story? The feast without fish or something similar? Chef Dominique's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You suggest we deliberately draw attention to our limitation? I suggest we transform it into a strength. Show that true culinary excellence isn't just about expensive ingredients perfectly executed. It's about creativity, adaptability, making ordinary ingredients extraordinary. A slow smile spread across his face. It's risky. So is serving seafood we're not confident in, I countered. And this approach is true to our philosophy, cooking with meaning, with story. For the next several hours, we reimagined our menu from scratch. Chef Dominique abandoned his usual meticulous pre-planning and worked intuitively, drawing inspiration from the ingredients themselves. I contributed traditional techniques for elevating humble components, methods for concentrating, flavors for transforming textures. By dawn, we had created something entirely new, a menu that celebrated the land when the sea was unavailable. Root vegetables were transformed through smoking, aging, and fermentation. Grains were elevated with complex broths and unexpected spices. Meat preparations borrowed techniques typically reserved for seafood. As the staff arrived for the morning shift, we gathered them together to explain the situation and our solution. To my relief, they embraced the challenge with excitement rather than dread. It actually makes a better story, Priscilla pointed out. Anyone can create a perfect menu with perfect ingredients. This shows what we can do when faced with real-world limitations. We worked throughout the day, refining our improvised dishes, testing and adjusting. What had begun as a crisis evolved into something unexpectedly joyful, a team united by challenge, creating something unique from adversity. The Michelin reviewer arrived at precisely 7:30 that evening, a nondescript woman in simple attire who might have been anyone's aunt or neighbor. Only her focused attention and methodical note-taking betrayed her purpose. Priscilla seated her at a quiet corner table with good lighting, and the service began. I watched anxiously from the kitchen as our improvised menu unfolded course by course. Each dish was accompanied by a small card explaining our philosophy and the specific challenge we had faced that day. Rather than hiding our limitation, we celebrated how it had pushed us to greater creativity. The reviewer's face revealed nothing as she tasted each course, made notes, and moved on to the next. 2 hours passed, feeling like 20. Finally, as she prepared to leave, she asked to speak with the chef. Protocol prevented her from revealing her identity or purpose, but we all knew who she was. Chef Dominique emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. I followed close behind. "The meal was unusual," she said, her voice neutral. Not what I expected from Luminescence's reputation. Chef Dominique inclined his head slightly. "We faced a challenge today and chose to embrace it rather than compromise on quality." "I see." She glanced at the card explaining our approach. "And this dual philosophy, modern technique alongside traditional heritage, this is your standard approach?" "Yes," I interjected. "We believe both have their place in fine dining. Innovation and tradition can coexist, each strengthening the other." She nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting concept. Thank you for the experience." And with that, she was gone. The kitchen fell silent as the door closed behind her. Then Chef Dominique turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said finally, "we have done what we could. Now we wait." The wait proved longer and more agonizing than any of us anticipated. Michelin's evaluation process is notoriously secretive and thorough, with results typically announced months after a visit. We continued our work, refining our dual menu approach, building our reputation through word of mouth and critical acclaim from local food writers. 3 months after the reviewer's visit, Luminescence had been transformed. Gone was the sterile exclusivity that had defined it before. In its place was something warmer, more welcoming, though no less excellent. We maintained the white tablecloths and impeccable service, but added personal touches, handwritten notes about each heritage dish, photographs of staff members' families displayed discreetly near the entrance, an open kitchen policy that allowed interested diners to observe traditional techniques firsthand. Our clientele changed too. Yes, we still attracted wealthy patrons and special occasion diners, but now they came for the experience rather than the status. More importantly, we developed a loyal base of repeat customers, people who returned week after week to see which culture we were featuring, which family recipes we had adapted. Through it all, my relationship with Priscilla evolved in ways I never could have predicted. The young woman who had once dismissed my cooking as embarrassing now spent Sunday afternoons in my kitchen, learning recipes not just from me, but from other staff members' families as well. Her natural talent for organization and presentation complemented my instinctive approach to flavor and texture. Together, we began documenting the heritage recipes in a format that could be shared and preserved, not a formal cookbook, but a living collection of stories and techniques. 4 months after the reviewer's visit, Vincent called an emergency staff meeting before opening hours. His expression was grave as we gathered in the dining room. "I've received information from a contact at Michelin," he announced without preamble. "The results will be officially announced next week, but—" He paused, looking around at our anxious faces. "The suspense is unnecessary, Vincent," Chef Dominique said tightly. "Just tell us." Vincent's serious expression suddenly broke into a wide smile. "We've been awarded a star." The room erupted in cheers, applause, embraces. Chef Dominique stood motionless, as if unable to process the news, then suddenly swept me into an unexpected hug that lifted me off my feet. "We did it!" he exclaimed, his professional reserve completely abandoned. "Our crazy experiment worked!" Vincent raised his hands, calling for quiet. "There's more." The official review specifically mentions our heritage program as a bold, meaningful innovation in fine dining. They were particularly impressed by our adaptation during the seafood crisis, called it a masterclass in culinary problem-solving. Priscilla made her way to my side, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "This was all because of you," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You changed everything." "We all did," I corrected gently. Every person in this room contributed something essential. The celebration continued through the morning, but by noon we were back to work, preparing for that evening's service with renewed focus and pride. The star was a validation, certainly, but the true reward had been the journey itself, the transformation, of luminescence from a temple of culinary pretension to a home for meaningful dining experiences. 6 months after I bought the restaurant where my daughter-in-law worked, I found myself hosting a very special dinner service. It was Thaddeus's birthday, and we had closed the restaurant to the public for a private celebration. The tables had been rearranged into one long communal setting, with Thaddeus at the head. Around him sat not just our immediate family, but the entire luminescent staff and their families, Zoya and her parents, Miguel and his husband, Chef Dominique and his teenage daughter who had flown in from France, Vincent, and dozens more. Nearly 60 people in all, representing over a dozen different cultural backgrounds. Instead of a formal service, we had prepared a true feast, a table laden with dishes from every heritage we had featured over the past months. Priscilla's grandmother's gumbo sat alongside Chef Dominique's coq au vin. Miguel's mole negro complemented Zoya's biryani. My own contribution was a recreation of the very first meal I had ever prepared for Rajiv, a simple chickpea curry that had won his heart 50 years earlier. As we settled in to eat, Thaddeus stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice warm with emotion, "to my mother, Esmera, who taught me that food is more than sustenance, it's connection, it's heritage, it's love made visible." I felt tears prick at my eyes as glasses rose around the table. "And," he continued, smiling at Priscilla, "to my wife, who had the wisdom to see when she was wrong and the courage to change." Priscilla blushed, but raised her glass higher, her eyes meeting mine with genuine affection. "Finally," Thaddeus concluded, "to luminescence, not just a Michelin-starred restaurant, but a place where traditions are honored, where stories are told, where unlikely families are formed." "To luminescence," the room echoed, glasses clinking. As the feast began in earnest, plates passing, conversations flowing, laughter erupting, I sat back and simply observed the scene before me. 6 months ago, I had been a lonely widow whose cooking had been called embarrassing by her daughter-in-law. Now I was surrounded by a community bound together by food and respect. Chef Dominique slid into the empty chair beside me, a plate heaped with dishes from every tradition represented. "I have been meaning to ask you something," he said, his formal manner softened by good wine and better company. "Yes?" "Why did you really buy luminescence? Was it truly just to prove a point to your daughter-in-law?" I considered his question, watching as across the table, Priscilla demonstrated to Zoya's mother the proper way to make a roux for gumbo. "I think perhaps I bought it to prove something to myself," I answered honestly. "To show that my traditions, my knowledge, my entire life's work had value." He nodded thoughtfully. "And now? What does it mean to you now?" I smiled, gesturing to the vibrant scene before us. "Now it's about legacy. Not just mine, but all of ours. It's about preserving what matters, the dishes that tell our stories, the techniques that connect us to our past, the meals that bring us together." "A worthy mission for a restaurant," he agreed. "Much better than chasing trends or status." "And far more delicious," I added, helping myself to another serving of his grandmother's coq au vin. Later that evening, as the gathering began to wind down, Priscilla and Thaddeus presented me with a gift, a beautifully bound book. Inside were photographs, recipes, and stories from every heritage menu we had featured, professionally designed and ready for publication. "We thought it was time to share Luminescence's philosophy beyond our dining room," Priscilla explained. "A cookbook that's not just about techniques and ingredients, but about the people and histories behind each dish." I ran my fingers over the title page, Heritage, Cooking as Connection by the Luminescence Family, with a special introduction by Esmera Kalani. It's beautiful, I whispered, deeply touched. When did you find time to create this? We've been working on it for months, Thaddeus admitted. Everyone contributed. Recipes, family photos, stories. It's truly a community project. The publisher thinks it could be quite successful, Priscilla added. They've never seen a cookbook with this particular approach before. I smiled at the irony. My embarrassing cooking had evolved into something worthy of publication. But, more importantly, it had become a bridge between generations, between cultures, between my daughter-in-law and myself. As the last guest departed and we began the relaxed process of cleaning up, all hands helping, no hierarchy tonight, I found myself in the kitchen beside Priscilla, both of us elbow-deep in soapy water. I never thanked you properly, she said quietly, passing me a plate to dry. For what? For not giving up on me. For seeing past my awful behavior to the insecure person underneath. For teaching me that real sophistication isn't about rejecting tradition. It's about honoring. I squeezed her shoulder gently. Family is complicated. We all make mistakes. Still, she insisted, buying this restaurant was probably the best thing that could have happened, for all of us. You gave me a chance to be part of something meaningful, something bigger than myself. And you rose to the occasion beautifully, I replied. Your contribution to Luminescence's success has been essential. She smiled, a genuine warmth that still surprised me sometimes. We make a good team, don't we? Who would have thought? Indeed, who would have thought? Certainly not me, standing in my kitchen 6 months earlier, stinging from her casual dismissal of my life's passion. I couldn't have imagined then how completely one impulsive decision would transform not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to Luminescence. My daughter-in-law had called my cooking embarrassing, so I bought the restaurant where she worked. But what began as an act of defiance had evolved into something far more significant, a reclamation of heritage, a celebration of diversity, a bridge between generations. As we finished cleaning and prepared to leave, Chef Dominique approached with a small package. A birthday gift for you, he said, though your birthday is not for several months. Surprised, I unwrapped it to find a chef's knife, hand-forged, perfectly balanced with my initials engraved on the blade. The cook should have a knife worthy of her hands, he said simply. I had it made by an artisan in my village. It's exquisite, I breathed, testing its weight in my palm. Thank you. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. I have learned much from you these past months, Mrs. Kalani. Perhaps the most important lesson is that true cooking comes not from the head, but from the heart. You have helped me rediscover mine. Coming from the once arrogant chef who had initially dismissed my traditional cooking as irrelevant, it was perhaps the highest compliment I could have received. As I drove home that night, the starred restaurant now mine, the knife from a master chef in my bag, the cookbook bearing my name soon to be published, I thought about the strange, winding path that had led me here. How one cutting remark had sparked a transformation far beyond anything I could have imagined. In my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had taught Thaddeus to cook, where I had weathered Priscilla's early disdain, where I had prepared countless meals with love as the primary ingredient, I hung the new knife on my magnetic strip alongside my well-worn tools. Old and new, side by side, each with its purpose, each with its story. At 62, I had found not just a new career, but a new purpose. Preserving traditions, honoring heritage, creating connections through food. My cooking, once dismissed as embarrassing, had become the foundation for a one-star restaurant and an innovative cookbook. My relationship with my daughter-in-law, once strained by misunderstanding and insecurity, had evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared passion, all because I had refused to accept that my traditions didn't matter. All because I had been bold enough to reclaim my worth, to demonstrate that cooking with heart Cooking that carries history and meaning will always find its audience. As I settled into bed that night, I thought of Dadi, my grandmother who had first taught me to identify spices blindfolded, to knead dough with patience, to cook with love above all else. What would she think of all this? I wondered. A Michelin star, a cookbook, a restaurant transformed by her recipes and philosophies. I smiled into the darkness, knowing the answer. She would say that food had done what it always does. What it has done since the beginning of humanity. It had brought people together, bridged differences, honored ancestors, created community. My daughter-in-law had called my cooking embarrassing, but in the end, that dismissive comment had sparked something powerful. Not just a change in her perspective, but a transformation in my own life. It had pushed me to stand up for what I valued, to reclaim my voice, to create a legacy beyond what I ever imagined possible. Sometimes the path to finding ourselves begins with someone else's misjudgment. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's inviting them to the table, sharing your food, and watching as they discover what they've been missing all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.